is Seth Makemer from the Blazing Musket. We are joined by Chris Wittyngham from MLS Season Pass. Chris, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to do it.
So, Chris, Revolution fans have heard your voice quite a bit in recent weeks. You were there for the Inter Miami game. You were going to be there for the Philadelphia game. One thing that you have the distinct pleasure of is your voice is synonymous with goals. So I'm curious, do you plan out your goal calls before the goals actually happen?
No, but I have put a lot of intentionality into kind of what scenarios can come up and sort of ultimately what you need to say over the course of a goal call. So in some ways, I sort of describe it to other people as having like this out of body experience where you're trying to come up with the perfect way to say things. And like it involves a lot of study, it involves a lot of preparation to sort of like, all right, if that happens, then you have to say this. If this happens, you have to say that. And it really is sort of the way that I define the work. So it's interesting that that's your first question, because for me, it is sort of the job number one is to make sure that, you know, if the player goes back and watches the goal or it's on a highlight package in 5 years, that the call sort of accurately summed up that moment and sort of lived up to what it was.
Do you have a favorite goal call that you look back and you're like, I totally nailed that one?
The funny thing is, like, if I probably said something, I'd probably go back and watch and be like, ah, it wasn't that good. The one that actually is most memorable, just because it was kind of like the biggest game that I had called to that point, was Cali Clasico between San Jose and LA Galaxy, and Shea Salinas scored a goal really late in that game, and it was like sort of the classic Goonies, classic San Jose. You know, you can't kill them until they're done, and they get a goal late. It was at Stanford Stadium, so there's like 45,000 people there, and I feel like I did that moment justice. But if I probably went back and listened to it now, I'd be like, yeah, could have done that better, could have done this better.
This past weekend, you got to see some goals. One of the goals was called back. Noah Buck, 18-year-old, with a really nice goal. I'm curious from your own perspective. We have this VAR situation that lives now. When you're calling a goal, is that kind of sometimes in the back of your mind that that goal might be called back, or do you just really try to live in the moment no matter what?
It's an interesting sort of philosophical debate. I've talked about this with other commentators. So my view of it is that it's in the back of my mind, but I prefer, if I'm going to err, I'm going to err on the side of it will stand, because like I said, I do believe in sort of like the standing the test of time. You want to live it up to the moment. And to me, if you go back and listen to a goal call and it's a good goal, and all the commentators talking about is, well, this is going to be reviewed by VAR, then that you're sort of killing the moment with that. So it's always in the back of my mind. I'm always looking towards the assistant referee to see sort of kind of where their posture is. But I'm more of the school of, you want to make sure that you capture the moment of that goal. For Noel Buck, he's a teenager. He could have, like we had just talked about on the broadcast, the fact that he didn't go to the under 20 World Cup and how that might have been a bad call by the US. And so I wanted to say, and like that would have lived on with the call had it stood. But yeah, I'm sort of conscious that you can sort of be made to look like a fool if you go nuts over a goal that is eventually disallowed. But I'd rather, in my view, do that than the opposite, which is make it all about the call. And then this moment that was, a really nice soccer moment has nothing as a soundtrack underneath it that can sort of live with the memory.
So let's talk about that moment. Noah Buck gets the goal. It's called back using video of the assistant referee. They've ruled that Latif Blessing might have distracted or affected the goalkeeper. From your perspective, do you think that goal should have stood?
I can see both sides of it, which I guess sort of lends to the is it clear and obvious sort of standard that I think VAR was brought into the game for. I know that offside is different because if you're offside, you're offside. But that is sort of a judgment call. Now, I was sent sort of an image of, you draw a straight line from the goalkeeper to Noel Buck, and Latif Blessing is right in the middle of it. And so it's like, okay, that sort of by the standard of the law is offside. But I also, if you're sort of doing like a judgment call, I think Drake Callender can see it. I think that even if you remove Latif Blessing from the situation, he's probably not saving it. And so it's sort of that judgment of the firm application of the law, the strict application of the law, which I think probably would suggest that it was the correct decision, versus I think the way that you sort of look at a game and go, that wasn't interfering with play. It's also not really what VAR was brought in for. And I think the ultimate thing is something that JB Watson, my partner on the game, talked a lot about, which is the notion of the goalkeeper coming up and complaining or saying he's offside, he was in my way. Drake Callender came up and said nothing, and maybe that's just because he's a really good guy and doesn't want to get into the face of officials. But to me, it suggested that he didn't think it was an offside decision.
Yeah, I think one tough thing that we're looking at with video assisted refereeing is that it feels like sometimes we're over refereeing the game. That you're nitpicking that that person has a slight bit offside, or that goal that was not going to be savable. And we saw the Revs have to deal with that earlier this year with that deflected goal that was called back. Dylan Barrero would have been an own goal. Those feel like hard decisions, and especially this past weekend, it's a hard decision because this is only the second time that the Revolution have lost this season. The first time against an Eastern Conference foe. Now, this Revolution team is a little bit different. They now have lost Dylan Barrero. Gustavo Bo continues to be out. From your perspective, who has seen this team quite a bit, are these worrying signs for this Revolution team, or do you think they're going to be okay in the long run?
I will say, I think I look at the current squad, and I think that it's a team that is overperforming its sort of talent on paper. When you look at the players that are currently available, I think with Bo fit, I think with Henry Kessler fit, I think with Dylan Barrero fit, that's a really good team. That's a supporter shield contender, and they were on their way. But I think this current team, they're going to have to see some pretty big steps forward. I think from a player like Giacomo Vrioni, you pay a lot of money for your DP center forward, you got to produce every week. And I think you look at the wing positions. This past week it was Noel Buck and it was Emmanuel Boateng. Like Noel Buck's been a great story. I think he's on his way to being a very good player. But I don't think you go into the season thinking he's going to be the backbone of a supporter shield contender. So I think the talent right now to me doesn't suggest it's a team that's going to be fighting towards the top of the Eastern Conference. But Bruce Arena has always gotten teams to overperform some of their parts. I felt like 2022 for the Revs was very much an aberration. And so I think they'll be fine in the long run.
So let's talk about Giacomo Vrioni. He's a big name player. He's a big contract player. He's someone who's not regularly starting. He comes off the bench last week, only has one touch on the ball. This is an ongoing conversation that I'm having with people in the area, with national pundits. From your opinion, is Giacomo Vrioni eventually going to come good for this Revolution team, or is he not?
I don't know. I don't know. I think it's one of those things where, incoming transfers into Major League Soccer get their time. They can bide their chance and figure it out. I think, a David Goss on Extra Time, our colleague has this theorem that, it takes at least 6 months for an import to fully get integrated into the league, and you have to give time. But you also, this is not the sort of level of pedigree where you go, well, it's definitely going to work out because he's done it in X League and for this club and in this situation. And you just don't know. You don't know if it's going to work out.
Yeah, it becomes very tough. Like you said, though, you have Bruce Arena, the winningest coach in MLS history. When you think about a team led by Bruce Arena, is that where you get a lot of confidence that this team will eventually figure things out?
Yeah, he just knows how to operate within this league, and he just knows week in, week out what it takes to win. I think he knows how to push the right buttons and man manage and sort of this very particular nation to coach soccer in, right? You could be coaching, experienced professionals that have been here and done that, like Carlos Heel and Andrew Farrell, and you could be, bringing along 18-year-olds into your side. That's just the nature of coaching in this league. You have players from all kinds of backgrounds, and I think Bruce has always been able to identify the kind of player that works in this league, and from a personal standpoint, how to manage them and how to not only get them comfortable, but also play a style of play that works in the American game. You watch MLS games, particularly in person, and I think they take on a very unique character. When you're watching an MLS game. And I think, and I sort of noticed that when covering Inter Miami for a while. I was sort of based in Miami and covering their radio games. I sort of realized that Miami, it took a few years to understand what the league looked like from a playing standpoint. I think Phil Neville's eventually gotten his way to figuring that out. You know what it takes. Bruce Arena has always understood what it takes to win in this league, how to play stylistically, and how to put the pieces together to make it work. So I do have the ultimate confidence in Bruce, but I also can understand how maybe Revolution fans are like, well, he always figured it out until he didn't last year. And it was such a surprise last year that you get to game 34, that team's not in the playoffs. When you look at the talent available, when you look at, what he had built. I know you lose Buchanan, you lose Turner, and you lose Adam Buksa. It was always going to be difficult, but even still, you at least expect them to make the playoffs. And I definitely expect this team to make the playoffs and probably at least host or have home field advantage in the first round of the new playoff format. But I do have ultimate confidence in Bruce Arena.
So, Chris, people like you and I, we watch the game a lot. We analyze the game a lot. We don't make a lot of decisions. We have a lot of opinions sometimes. Obviously, you're very knowledgeable about this league. You're very knowledgeable about this sport. You're very knowledgeable about the Apple deal. Let's make you a leader right now. Let's put you into the leadership position. If you're in charge of Apple, I've been very impressed by Apple season pass. I think that the MLS 360 has become a go-to for me when certain games aren't on. The wrap-up show is great. I feel like what's really great is that every single week they're taking feedback and trying to enhance on the product. So if you're in charge of Apple, what is something that you tweak? What is something you make better? What is something that you add to make the product a little better for fans?
So can I just say, can I do a plug before we get to the thing that I would add? Something has already been added that I would have suggested this week for the first time. Apple and MLS Season Pass will be adding a multicast feature where you can watch multiple games at the same time of your own choosing. Obviously, the MLS 360 crew, they've always got the double box going, the quad box going, but now you can pick your own games. So that is a new feature that has come to MLS Season Pass, which is coming this weekend. If I were to add something, it would be a show that is similar to Match of the Day. I've actually been in the UK a few times. And for those that don't know, basically, particularly on Saturdays, a lot of the games are not, or a lot of the Premier League games are not shown on British television because they have a blackout, which encourages people to go to games in the stadium. And so the only way that people can access any video or any highlights to those games is on the show called Match of the Day, which airs on Saturday night. And it's sort of a 8 to 9 minute highlight package of every game, followed by a comprehensive breakdown of the refereeing decisions of the big tactical point in the game. And it's about a 90-minute show that covers all these games. I would love to see something like that for MLS. I know that show, if I said it's 90 minutes for the Premier League, they have 7 games a day, probably be 2 hours if it's an MLS show because you're dealing with 13, 14 games. But I'd just love to see extended highlights analysis, use the commentary. I know we have MLS wrap up. It's a half hour and they cover a lot, but I just think a show like that can have a little bit more depth and bring some highlights and bring some color to the league so that if you miss the league on a Saturday, you can watch a show for 2 hours and catch up on everything you missed.
I'm curious. They've added some new features. You guys have those updates every week from the teams, as well as the previews that the experts are putting out there. Instant replay is another one out there. Do you know of any more content, debate shows, anything that might be in the future in terms of content for Apple?
I mean, obviously, extra time has been added to the MLS Season Pass. Now you can watch that. The MLS 360 full show is available, so you can kind of relive what it was like in full time. But our current content offering is our current content offering, and like you said, I think sort of the fact that it's done on a club by club basis. If you're a Revolution fan, they have a preview for you. They have a preview from the league perspective of the game. So I've done a few things for club rooms. So I'm really a fan of that kind of localized concept.
Cool. So let's switch hats now. Let's put you in the seat of Commissioner Don Garber. If you were to change one thing about Major League Soccer, a rule, a concept, something to make the league better, what do you change if you're Commissioner Don Garber?
I think the playoff format has always been something of big discussion. I know that my answer probably is not the best answer from a business standpoint because I think the league has always wanted to give keep more markets in it until late in the season, so you feel like every market still has a chance towards the end of the year, and you go in person. I've always been a big believer, and this is not even just in MLS. I think it's in all sports. To me, scarcity is a really important concept in professional sports. The NFL only has 17 games, and they're the biggest sports league in America. And it's because they only play for 22 weeks a year, and you miss it for the other 30 weeks when they aren't playing. And that, by the way, is not because the NFL is some genius. It's because the human body literally can't do anymore, right? If the NFL could play 52 weeks a year, they would, but the human body can literally not do any more football than that. And I think that, if you look at, the race for the top four in the Premier League, it's because 4 spots is really exclusive. It's really hard. And you have to achieve a really high standard. I have always been of the belief that even in, the NBA, the NHL, shrink the playoff field. Ultimately, it means that your very best teams are getting in. And I think that you have a good sports league on your hands when really good teams don't make the playoffs. And it feels like you have to put everything into the regular season because that's ultimately what the bulk of the product is. The bulk of any product is the regular season. I'm a big believer in obviously regular seasons determining titles in the Premier League. I'm a big believer in college football. If you lose twice, you're done. Like that's such an amount of peril in each game. You have to win. You have to deliver each and every week. Otherwise, your fans are disappointed. I just think that creates so much more interest in the long run. Now, obviously, they don't put me in charge of the business for a reason, because that probably makes absolutely zero business sense. But I would shrink the playoffs a little bit.
All right, let's switch hats one more time. You're becoming Bruce Arena, sporting director of the New England Revolution. We have a transfer window coming up this summer. You mentioned that there's some injuries that this team is dealing with. If you're Bruce Arena and you can only add one position, one player for a position, what player or what position are you targeting?
Has to be the wide areas. I think, and I know that you've already put some resources in towards Barrero, and it was a great signing. It worked, but unfortunately, he's injured. So I think now you look at that area. I just don't think that there's enough there to really carry through the full of the season. Obviously, Noel Buck has been really good in deputizing along that right side, and he's done a job. But I don't think that's his best position. I think he's best in the central midfield area. So to me, there have to be more answers in wide areas, and I'm sure that Bruce Arena probably even wanted to find an answer in this first transfer window, but you carry it through to the summer, you see where you're at, and I imagine they'll be looking to sign at least one wide player come the summer.
All right, so let's get you into a little bit of a quick mode here. You're so lyrical in the way you speak, the way you choose your words are so great. I'm going to give you a player from the New England Revolution. You give me one or two words that come immediately to mind for that player. Does that sound good?
Let's do it.
Let's start with Georgie Petrovic. Start from the back.
Imperious.
Ooh.
He's so dominant back there, and seeing him in that Miami game, I forget which moment of the game that he made a really big save, but it's like, oh man, is it going to be one of those nights? And it kind of reminded me of watching Thibaut Courtois in the Champions League second leg. I know that he eventually let in 4 goals, but before Manchester City got there first, it was like, oh my God, are Man City going to actually find a way through this guy, because he's so damn good. That you sort of feel that sense of doom, like, oh no, are we going to get one of those performances? So I would definitely go for Imperious for Georgie.
I like this because I feel like this is an SAT prep school now. So we're all going to learn a little bit of something. Let's go with DeJuan Jones.
Developing. I think he's really taking steps forward this year. Because we spoke to him about. I've actually had the chance to speak to him twice ahead of the first game that I covered against Nashville for New England, and then this past weekend ahead of the game against Miami. And I think he's talked about how he's wanted to grow different areas of his game. How he's actually developing now, working with Emmanuel Boateng as opposed to Dylan Barrero, a game of underlapping as opposed to overlapping. Obviously, the New England fullbacks love to get forward, and most of those runs are overlapping. But how can he play sort of on the corner of the penalty box and interchange with Emmanuel Boateng, who's trying to come off the touchline and play inside and combine? And so I think he's a player who's really working on a variety of skills. The thing that I've always been curious about is, obviously it's worked out having both him and Brandon Bai on the side, but I've always kind of wondered, could he play for a team where he's a right back week in, week out? Because obviously he's playing as a right-footed player at left back. And that has thus far not been obviously an impediment to New England's success. But from a personal standpoint, for him, I've always been curious what it'd be like if he was able to play there every week.
And we've seen that on the national team, right? Him play right back, and you wonder his development there. How about Noel Buck, the 18-year-old?
Precocious. He's a precocious young talent coming through. I think he has been so impressive this year. And we spoke to him ahead of one of the games that we did as well. And it's just remarkable for a player of his age that he just has so much about him. Obviously, he's got a pretty incredible story. He's a huge Chelsea fan because he's got a British passport and he's got big connections to the UK. And the fact that he's taken this on so young and has been so good week in, week out, when a lot of young players you play, and it's like, well, I don't know if we can play him that consistently. You see a lot of managers, and Bruce Arena has been one of them in the past, where you go, I don't know if I can play young players because I don't know if I can trust them. That's really the biggest thing, is that you don't get that level of consistency. But no Bucks delivered that level of consistency week in, week out. He's been an incredibly strong player, and I just think he's a top talent. I'm stunned that he didn't go to the Under-20 World Cup, and I know that he probably came on late, and maybe he wasn't on the radar of the Under-20 management team, and he hasn't been in previous camps. And I understand that U.S. Soccer is trying to develop a thing where they're a little bit more like club teams, where you're not just picking players based off current form, but based off how they've built over the course of time. But I think Noel Buck should be in Argentina with the U.S. under-20s. I'm stunned that he's not there.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. He had some really great moments on the attacking end. More of a defensive player, like you said, but it was cool to see him be able to shine in these different ways. Let's give you a couple more and get you out of here. Bobby Wood, a little bit of a surprise this season. What word comes to mind?
Persistent. I think he's someone that the one thing when you watch him he might not be involved. He had one good chance against Miami. I don't think he took it as well as he should have. But the one thing that he will always do is the running. He will always do the hard work, and he'll always make sure that he's leading a forward press. And I think when you look at all the forward options, that's probably why he continues to play, because they're all sort of on a similar scoring level. But I think that's the one thing that's sort of become underrated about the modern game is very often forwards are chosen for their defending. I think that Bobby Wood, you know that every single game coming from the background of playing in Germany, where you sort of have no choice but to be a defending forward, he does that hard work. And so I think that's why he continues to get picked, and he will eventually have to score a consistent number of goals to retain that place in the team. But he probably has it because of the amount of running that he does.
Giacomo Veroni.
Um, Mystery. I think he's obviously someone where they signed him for a reason. He hit for a bunch of goals in Austria for a reason. You know that there's a talent there, but how do you unlock it? And I think at the beginning of the season, it was coming back to full fitness, but now it's how do you get him in the team and get him scoring goals? What ultimately is the way to get him comfortable in this side? And I know it took Adam Buksa a while, and I'm sure New England fans had their frustrations with him before he eventually took off. And so it can happen. It can just be a switch gets flipped, a finger gets snapped, and all of a sudden Giacomo Rioni is scoring goals. But I'm sure that every day Bruce Arena is trying to figure out in training sessions and talking with his assistant coaches, how do we get this guy going?
You mentioned him. We have to end with him. Bruce Arena, a legend in the game. I'm sure you dealt with him a lot in the media. What word comes to mind? If there is one word to describe Bruce Arena, what is that word?
I'll go for an expression, one of a kind. I think he is a unique character in the history of the American game, and I can't imagine there will be anybody like him ever again in terms of his background, in terms of all the different things that he will have done. He is an American soccer legend, and it's remarkable that he's still going. And like you see a lot of managers for whom the game passes them by, and the fact that it hasn't for Bruce, that he joined New England and you're sort of looking at going, I don't know, he's an older guy, he's been around for a while. Is he really going to be successful there? But man, has he been? And I think it has to be a pleasure for New England fans to sort of know that you sort of have a baseline level with Bruce Arena, particularly for the given the seasons that preceded it for New England, how much of a struggle they were. The fact that he just comes in and you know you're getting a certain level of professionalism, a certain level of consistency with your side. And I just think you tell his story, there will never be another like Bruce Arena.
Certainly right. I know you mentioned it's a pleasure to have Bruce Arena in New England. It's a pleasure for me to be able to speak to you, Chris. Chris, can you tell the people where they can find you on social media and how to catch the game this weekend?
Yeah, just at Chris Wittyngham on the various social platforms, Twitter and Instagram, and MLS Season Pass on Apple TV. Check out the game. I'll be alongside Lori Lindsay from Subaru Park on Saturday night as New England travel to take on the Philadelphia Union. 7:30 Eastern kickoff. MLS Season Pass. Check it out.
Thank you so much, Chris.
All right. Thank you, Seth.